Married at 12. Pregnant at 13. From broken child to England's most powerful woman. You're standing in the candlelit chamber of a Norman castle, and the air smells of melted wax and damp stone. The girl before you is so small that her wedding gown has been gathered at the waist with extra cord, bunched like a sack around her thin shoulders. She is 12 years old. Her hands tremble as the bishop lifts them toward the man beside her. He is 24, a warrior whose tunic still bears the rust-colored stains of recent battle. This is not a celebration. This is a transaction. Her name is Matilda, and she does not yet know that she is about to become the most powerful woman England will ever see before the Tudor age. She does not know that the child growing inside her at 13 will survive when so many others will not. She does not know that she will spend the next 2 decades fighting for a crown that belongs to her by blood, only to watch men steal it, justify it, and rewrite history to erase her claim. All she knows in this moment is that childhood ended the day her father signed the marriage contract. Before we go further into this extraordinary story of survival, ambition, and the brutal cost of medieval power, take a moment to hit that like button if you're as fascinated by these untold chapters of history as I am. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. It's honestly incredible that we're all here, scattered across continents and time zones, united by our need to understand what women endured and how they fought back, in ages that tried to silence them forever. The girl's name was Matilda of England, born in February 1102 to King Henry I and Queen Matilda of Scotland. She entered a world where daughters were currency, their bodies collateral in treaties between kingdoms. But this particular daughter carried something rare. She was legitimate. She was royal. And after her brother William Adelin drowned in the White Ship disaster of 1120, she became something almost unthinkable, the acknowledged heir to the English throne. Her father, desperate to secure his legacy, did what no English king had done before. He forced his barons to swear an oath recognizing Matilda as his successor. 3 times they swore. 3 times they would break that oath. But before Matilda could claim her inheritance, she had to survive the machinery of medieval marriage. At the age of 8, she was sent across the Channel to the Holy Roman Empire, betrothed to Henry V, a man in his 30s who needed a bride with impeccable lineage to legitimize his contested rule. The child who left England in 1110 would not return for 15 years. She would be crowned Empress at 12. She would learn to speak German, to navigate the treacherous courts of the German princes, to carry herself with the authority of someone chosen by God. And at 13, she would become pregnant for the first time, her body forced into motherhood before it had finished growing. The records are silent on what that pregnancy cost her. Medieval chroniclers rarely bothered to document the suffering of women, even royal ones. But we know the statistics. We know that in the 12th century, childbirth killed 1 in 3 women before they reached 30. We know that girls who conceived before 15 faced even steeper odds, their pelvises not yet widened, their bodies cannibalizing themselves to feed the growing child. Matilda's first pregnancy ended in stillbirth or early infant death. The chronicles mention no surviving child from those early years. But she survived. And that survival, that sheer biological endurance, would become the foundation of everything that followed. The scale of what faced Matilda becomes clear only when we step back and look at the structure of 12th century power. This was not a world where women inherited thrones. In France, the Salic law explicitly forbade female succession. In the Empire, the electors would never have chosen a woman. Even in England, no queen had ruled in her own right since the mythical Boudica faced down Rome. The entire architecture of feudal society rested on a single assumption, that power passed from father to son, that legitimacy flowed through male blood, that women were vessels, not sovereigns. Into this system, Henry VIII tried to wedge his daughter. The oath he extracted from his barons in 1127 was an act of desperation masquerading as authority. Stephen of Blois was there, Matilda's cousin, swearing loyalty with the rest. Robert of Gloucester, her half-brother, placed his hand on holy relics and promised to uphold her claim. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself blessed the arrangement, and every man in that room knew, even as the words left their lips, that they were swearing to something they would never honor. Not because they hated Matilda personally, but because the idea of a woman wearing the crown was, to their minds, against nature itself. Matilda returned to England in 1125 when her husband Henry V died, leaving her a childless widow at 23. Her father, recognizing that she needed an heir to make her claim viable, arranged a second marriage. This time, the groom was Geoffrey of Anjou, a boy of 14 to her 26 years. The age gap was reversed, the power dynamic inverted. Matilda, who had been Empress of the Romans, who had presided over imperial courts and signed charters with authority, was now expected to defer to a teenage count who barely controlled his own inheritance. The humiliation was deliberate. Henry needed the alliance with Anjou more than he cared about his daughter's dignity. The marriage was a disaster. Matilda and Geoffrey fought constantly, separating multiple times before finally producing 3 sons. When Henry I died in December 1135, Matilda was in Anjou, heavily pregnant with her 3rd child, unable to cross the Channel to claim the throne her father had promised her. Into that gap stepped Stephen of Blois. He moved fast, reaching London within weeks, securing the treasury, getting himself crowned before Matilda could even leave her childbed. The barons, relieved to have a male alternative, flocked to him. The oath they had sworn to Matilda evaporated like morning frost. They could not look away from what happened next, though many tried to justify it. Stephen's usurpation was not a subtle thing. It was a theft performed in daylight, blessed by a church that preferred a king to a queen, supported by men who could not stomach the idea of bending their knee to a woman. The official explanation was that Henry had changed his mind on his deathbed, that he had released his barons from their oath, but no one who mattered believed it. Everyone knew the truth. Stephen took the crown because he could and because the alternative was unthinkable. Matilda did not accept it. From 1139 to 1153, England burned in a civil war that contemporaries called the Anarchy. Castles rose across the countryside, over 1,000 of them, each one a miniature tyranny where local lords terrorized the population. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded that men said openly that Christ and his saints slept. The machinery of justice collapsed. The rule of law became a memory. And at the center of it all was Matilda, fighting for a throne that should have been hers by every law except the one that mattered most. She was a woman. The rituals of war in the 12th century followed a brutal logic. Battles were rare, sieges common. Armies were small, professional forces of knights backed by mercenaries and conscripted peasants. Victory came not from glorious combat but from slow starvation, from burning crops and poisoning wells, from breaking the will of the civilian population until they begged their lord to surrender. Matilda learned these lessons the hard way. Her forces won victories at Wallingford, at Lincoln, places where her military commanders outmaneuvered Stephen's loyalists. But each victory raised the same question: what do you do with a captured king? At Lincoln in 1141, Matilda's forces did the unthinkable. They captured Stephen himself, taking him prisoner in the midst of battle. For 6 months she was the effective ruler of England, receiving the submission of the London guilds, preparing for her coronation at Westminster. She called herself Lady of the English, the feminine equivalent of the royal title, careful not to claim the word queen, which belonged to Stephen's wife. She issued charters, dispensed justice, behaved in every way like the sovereign she believed herself to be. She was one ceremony away from legitimacy, one coronation away from securing everything her father had promised. Then she lost it all. The accounts vary on exactly what went wrong. Some chroniclers claim she demanded too much money from the London merchants, that she spoke harshly when they expected feminine softness. Others suggest she refused to negotiate, insisted on her absolute right when compromise might have saved her. What's certain is that London rose against her. The citizens, led by Stephen's wife Matilda of Boulogne, drove her from the city before the coronation could take place. She fled west, back to her strongholds in Gloucester and Bristol, and she never got that close to the throne again. They could not look away from the woman who almost became queen. Even her enemies had to acknowledge her courage, her refusal to submit. When she was besieged at Oxford Castle in the winter of 1142, the situation was desperate. Stephen's forces surrounded the fortress, cutting off all supply. Snow fell thick on the frozen Thames. Inside the castle, food ran out. Matilda faced a choice: surrender and accept imprisonment, or attempt the impossible. She chose the impossible. On a December night, Matilda and 4 loyal knights lowered themselves from the castle walls by rope. They wore white cloaks to blend with the snow. They crossed the frozen river on foot, walking 6 miles through enemy lines to reach the safety of Wallingford. The escape was so audacious that it entered legend, the kind of story that should have been told about warrior kings. Instead, it was told about a woman in her 40s, a mother of 3, someone who was supposed to be soft and yielding. Matilda of England lowered herself from a castle wall in the dead of winter and walked through an army that wanted to capture her. And she did it in silence, leaving no tracks, no trace, disappearing like a ghost into the frozen night. But escape was not victory. By 1148, Matilda faced the truth that she could not win, not completely. The English barons would never accept her as queen, no matter how many battles she won. So she did something remarkable. She stopped fighting for herself and started fighting for her son. Henry Fitz-Empress was 14 when his mother brought him to England, 17 when he started leading armies in his own name. Where Matilda's claim had been contested, Henry's was unimpeachable. He was male. He was the grandson of Henry IV through the female line, but also the great-grandson through collateral male descent. And, most importantly, he was not his mother. In 1153, Stephen and Matilda negotiated the Treaty of Wallingford. Stephen would remain king for his lifetime, but Henry would succeed him, cutting out Stephen's own son, William. It was a compromise born of exhaustion. 19 years of war had broken England's spirit. The country desperately needed peace, and both sides were finally willing to set aside their pride to get it. When Stephen died in 1154, Henry II ascended to the throne without opposition. Matilda's fight was over. She had not won the crown for herself, but she had secured it for her bloodline. The psychological cost of those 19 years is impossible to calculate. Matilda lived through a siege at Oxford where she might have starved. She watched her half-brother Robert of Gloucester die, losing her greatest military commander and the one family member who had never wavered in his support. She saw her rival Stephen's wife, another Matilda, match her move for move, raising armies and securing alliances with the same ruthless efficiency. 2 women named Matilda, fighting a proxy war through the men they could command, neither one able to face the other directly because the rules of their world forbade it. Medieval chroniclers struggled to write about Matilda. They praised her courage but condemned her pride. They acknowledged her right but questioned her temperament. William of Malmesbury, generally sympathetic to her cause, still felt compelled to note that she was somewhat stiff and high-minded. The subtext was clear. She did not perform femininity correctly. She did not bow and scrape. She did not apologize for demanding what was legally hers. And for that, even her allies could not quite forgive her. But here is what the chronicles cannot erase. Matilda won. Not immediately, not in the way she wanted, but definitively. Her son became king. Her grandson became king. Her great-grandson became king. The Plantagenet dynasty that would rule England for over 3 centuries descended directly from her body, from the girl who married at 12 and conceived at 13, whose childhood was stolen to secure an alliance, whose young body was used and discarded in the machinery of empire building. Every Plantagenet king owed his throne to Matilda's survival, to her refusal to die in childbirth or submit to usurpation. There's an artifact that captures her story better than any chronicle. In the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, there's a manuscript containing a charter issued by Matilda during her brief period of supremacy in 1141. The seal is damaged, partially broken away, but you can still make out the figure of a woman enthroned, scepter in hand, crown on her head. The Latin inscription reads, Matilda Anglorum Domina, Matilda, Lady of the English. She never got to call herself queen, but she made certain that history would remember she had the right. In the end, perhaps the most remarkable thing about Matilda is not that she fought, but that she stopped fighting. She recognized, with a clarity that eluded most medieval rulers, when to yield. After 1148, she withdrew to Normandy, leaving the war to her son. She became his advisor, his regent when he was away campaigning, the Dowager Empress whose counsel was sought on matters of state. She lived to see Henry's coronation, to know that her struggle had not been in vain. She died in 1167 at 65, an extraordinary age for a woman of her era, especially one who had borne children so young. They could not look away, in the end, from what she represented. A woman who should have been queen. A mother who secured for her son what she could not win for herself. A child bride who survived the machinery designed to consume her and emerged as the founder of England's greatest medieval dynasty. The chroniclers tried to diminish her, to frame her as a tragic figure or a cautionary tale about female ambition. But the facts resist their narrative. Matilda of England was never crowned, never called queen in her lifetime, but she won. And every Plantagenet king who sat on England's throne did so because a girl of 12 survived her wedding night, because a child of 13 survived childbirth, because a woman of 40 survived a civil war that should have destroyed her. The paradox is this: Matilda's victory required her to disappear. She could not rule herself, but she could create a son who would rule. She could not wear the crown, but she could ensure the crown stayed in her bloodline. She was denied the throne by men who claimed biology made her unfit to rule, then used that same biology, her capacity to bear sons, to establish a dynasty that would dominate England for centuries. The very thing they said disqualified her became the instrument of her triumph. Perhaps that is the lesson worth remembering, that power is not always about the crown you wear, but about the legacy you leave behind, that sometimes the greatest victory is the one you win for someone else, and that a girl forced into marriage at 12, pregnant at 13, broken by a system designed to use her up and discard her, can still reach out across centuries and touch the very throne they tried to deny her. In the cold chamber where we began, Matilda stands in her oversized wedding gown, her child's hands placed in those of a man who will use her body to secure his legitimacy. She cannot know what's coming, the pregnancies that will nearly kill her, the war that will define her, the crown that will always remain just out of reach. But somewhere in that child's eyes, there is already the woman who will refuse to yield, who will walk through a snowstorm rather than surrender, who will lose every battle except the one that matters most. The girl is 12 years old. History is about to devour her, and she will survive anyway.